Bereishit bara Elohim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. Generally translated to mean, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And on the face of it, what we've got in Bereishit chapter 1, all 31 psukim, is a description of the way in which the world came to exist. However, that's only Kita Aleph. That is the pshat reading of this chapter. In actual fact, this chapter goes far beyond a description of cosmology, a description of how the world came to exist. And in fact, Rashi and the Ramban ask the question, why would anybody need to know why the world came to exist? Why is that so important for us to know that? What's important for us to know is how to live a good life, how to live a life which is acceptable in the eyes of God. Nevertheless, says the Ramban, that in this pasuk contains the shoresh hu Emunah. That actually what's being described here is not simply a technical process by which the world came into existence, but the foundational principles of our Emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And indeed, of the 13 principles of Ani Ma'amin of the Rambam, number 1 is Ani Ma'amin Be'emunah Shalema, Shabari Olam, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, that that he created and runs the whole world. The creation of the world coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not simply a descriptive principle of cosmology. It is a principle, the cornerstone of our Emunah. Let's have a closer look at this and understand what is really being said here. Interestingly, Rashi has his own way of formulating exactly the same idea, because Rashi looks at this very curious first word, Be-Reishit, and he seems to be saying that the word Reishis actually is the wrong word to use for the beginning. The beginning is the Hatchalah. Reishit actually in the Hebrew language is a construct form. It doesn't mean the beginning, it means the beginning of. You speak the beginning of a process, the beginning of a malchus, the beginning, Reishis Bikuri Ad Moscha, the beginning of the produce of your field. What is it the beginning of here? So here the word Reishis has a different function completely. And what is the Be-Reishit? So Rashi understands that the word Be, the letter Be, the first letter of the first word, doesn't mean in at all. That Be here is a shorthand for the Hebrew word Bishvil. That Be means Bishvil Reishis. That the pasuk here is giving us, already at the very, very outset of the Torah, is giving us an idea, not of how God brought the world into existence, but something much more relevant to us and much more important, and that is, what was the purpose for which God brought the world into existence? If the base, as Rashi says, means bishvil, then what it means is that purposefulness and the tachlis habriya, the goal for which the world was created, is actually written into the very first word of the Torah. And then says Rashi, so what does Reishis mean? So he brings a pasuk in Mishlei that Reishis is actually a description of the Torah itself. That Be-Reishit, the way this pasuk is deconstructed by Rashi and the Medrash, is that whatever we see in the universe was brought into existence for the purpose of the Torah, for the purpose that the values and the ideas and the practices of the Torah should come into fruition, that there should be a possibility for the Torah to exist and for the Torah to grow and to be learned and to be understood and to be practiced and to be followed. All that is the bishvil, is the purpose for which the world came into being. And here's actually an interesting point which I've had occasion a few times to discuss with students and scientists, and that is people seem to have the idea that there is a conflict, a point of contention between the Torah and science, modern science, on the question of evolution. And they seem to think that the Torah completely negates the idea of evolution, and this is completely not true. There's no reason why we can't accept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the process of bringing the world into existence, actually used the process of evolution as one of his tools for bringing the world to come to be the way it is. And indeed, if you look through the 6 days of creation, there clearly is a process, an escalation, if you like, from lower forms of life to higher forms of life, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu might have made one evolve from the other is perfectly acceptable. However, there is one crucial, if you like, bombshell difference between the scientific evolution and the Torah concept of evolution, and that focuses exactly on what Rashi is saying here. The focus is the problem here that we have to deal with when we're dealing with scientists and secular science is the idea not that there was evolution, but that evolution was random, that it was purposeless, that it came about accidentally, that it was a big bang, which was completely unregulated and unfocused. It just happened because it happened. And that is a sense of the secular view of the world as seemingly a purposeless universe, which is completely insensitive to any spiritual values or goals of any sort. And therefore, when Rashi says Be-Reishit, he's coming to actually address this problem. So there's no way that we can live a life as Jewish people with an understanding that the world somehow came to be the way it is accidentally. The world was created, Bereishit Bora Kimche Hashemayim v'Haaretz. It was created Be-Reishit, for the purpose of the Torah coming into existence. And Rashi repeats this idea, and the last word of Bereishit chapter 1. The first word is Bereishit. The last word is Vayer Vayvoke Yom Hashishi. On the word Hashishi is well known, the Rashi there. The Rashi says, again, Hashishi is a word which is out of place. It doesn't say Vayer Vayvoke Yom Ha'echod or Yom Hasheni or Hashlishi. It only says Yom Hashishi at the end, says Rashi. This is a veiled reference to a future sixth day. And that is the sixth day of Sivan when the Torah was given. On Shavuos, when the Torah is given, Matan Torah, on the 6th of Sivan, that is the time, says Rashi, what's that going to do with Bereishit? Because in the language of Rashi, the whole physical creation was tolui va'omed, was created, so to speak, on condition. It was on probation. Would it be able to create a group of people who would be able to stand and hear Onochi Hashem Elokecha and say Naseh v'Nishma? Only when that happened, then retroactively, the whole of the creation had a purpose and had a direction. Before then, it was a meaningless world, waiting for redemption in a certain way. And that was Klal Yisrael at Har Sinai, and that is the very close connection that exists between Matan Torah and Har Sinai. I remember actually as a teenager learning some Medrash. I had a teacher of mine who kept teaching me Medrash, and I had this feeling somehow that lots of the Midrashim sounded rather childish, right? And one of them always struck me whenever he mentioned it, that in Bereishit, the Medrash says that the letter Aleph came to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and complained, why don't you start with me? Why do you start with the base, which is the second letter of the alphabet? He was offended. And this question struck me as being a sort of a cartoon image of letters arguing with each other. I didn't quite understand why would the Torah have such simple, childish stories? And what was the answer that is given in the Medrash? The answer is that God says to the Aleph, he calms him down. He says, don't worry, there will come a time later on in history when I will come to the Jewish people at Har Sinai, and then I will start with you, with the Aleph. Onochi Hashem Elokecha starts with an Aleph. Very nice. So this is Medrash. And here you get a classic example of how Medrash is written. It's written in the most childish, simplest way that even a child can read it and somehow enjoy it, but actually contains some of the most profound philosophical principles of Jewish life. Here the Medrash is telling us it's true that the physical world was created before the Torah was given, in terms of the sequence of events, but actually when the Torah was given at Har Sinai, that was the Aleph. That was the priority. That was the primary value that God wanted to bring into this world. And the Beis means that the physical world was the secondary value. The physical world, in some ways, the stage setting, which will enable the Torah to be fulfilled. And that connection between Torah and the Bria is something very profound. I'd like to end off just with one of my favorite Perushim on this subject, which comes from the Baal HaTurim. The Dvar writing in Germany about 700 years ago, was famous for his Sephorim called the Turim, which were the foundation of later on the Shulchan Aruch. But he writes a very brief Perush ala Torah, but he brings together ideas in a unique way. So let me share with you just this to finish off this Dvar Torah. The Dvar writes as follows: have a look at this pasuk. Bereishit bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. 7 words, he says, which have 28 letters in them. There is another pasuk in the Torah which has 7 words and 28 letters, he says. And don't forget, he did this without a search machine and without a laptop. There is another pasuk. And what is that pasuk? Vayedaber Elokim eis kol hadvorim ha'ele lemor. The introductory pasuk to the 10 Commandments. So he says the Torah wants to draw our attention to these 2 psukim. This one introduces the creation of a physical world, and that one introduces the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai. These 2 psukim actually go side by side. They're 2 sides of the same coin, because the world itself was created Be-Reishit, Bishvil Reishis. And then he adds on something very beautiful, which is worth remembering. He says Chazal wanted to in some way capture this structure of these 2 crucial psukim in the Torah, and therefore when they came to write the Kaddish that we say so frequently in our tefillos, what is the central pasuk of the whole Kaddish? It is Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavorach La'olam Ula'olmei Olmaya. Says the Dvar 7 words and 28 letters, because the Kaddish is designed to evoke that crucial connection that we have between the physical creation, which is the world around us, and Matan Torah, which is our spiritual and inspirational values, which connect us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and which makes the whole world into a Merkava Lashchina. The whole world then becomes a vehicle to express Kavod Shamayim, because it's used for the Torah. And therefore we find in this remarkable structure of the Kaddish, we find a reference also to the 10 Commandments and also to Brias HaOlam, because of the way in which this central pasuk is written, and it evokes this particular structure. He goes on to say, which is subject for a separate share completely, that actually the 7 words and 28 letters is connected to Koheles chapter 3, where the pasuk says, Eis l'chol davar, there's a time for everything, and it brings psukim there, which have got seven psukim, each one with 4 times in them. So there are 28 zamanim: a time to cry, a time to laugh, a time for war, a time for peace, a time to plant, a time to uproot. All these different. He says there are 28 different zamanim, and these are 28 different zamanim written in 7 psukim. This 28-7 is a formula which evokes the power of bringing the world into existence, Bereishit bara Elokim, and the power of the Dvar Hashem at Har Sinai coming together. And Shlomo Melech is trying to tell us that part of Chachma, part of wisdom, is not just to know what to do the right thing, but to know the ace, to know the time which is the appropriate time to do it. And therefore, this is part of what the Dvar wants to teach us. And whenever we come back to Bereishit is a new start for us, a new year, a new opportunity to renew our connection to the Torah, the depth and the beauty of the Torah. The first chapter, indeed, is an account of how things came into existence, but actually it is the Yesodei Hadat. It gives us the foundational principles of Emunah, says the Ramban. Without an understanding that the world was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the Torah, we have no Torah at all. And therefore, the beginning of this new year, after the Chagim, is always an opportunity to renew our understanding of the depth and the beauty of Torah, and we should always be inspired by it and able to connect the physical and the spiritual worlds, Es HaShamayim, Es HaAretz, V'chein Yehi Ratzah.